First step is removing this pin that is securing, or this wire that is securing the ends of the pin. So it's really easy to do. It just goes right in there. You push it down a little bit on the inside. Pops right out on the outside. You take it out. Now it just goes into the pins through a little hole there. I'm using my hands. I took it out. The bottom comes right out. Once the safety wire is out, you should be able to take these pins right out. Just because I'm using one hand, I'm just going to give it a very light tap. If they're sitting in there really tight, just use a chisel, or rather a little punch. Just push them right out. This should come right out. Very easy. Before you take the bottom one, the back one, make a really good note of how this bracket goes, or rather how this pin goes right here, because it is attached to both pads and it is secured in place with this pin. So bottom pin comes right out. The pins are out. Now there's this little wire clip. You just pull it out of one pad. Be careful when you pull it out because it will want to stretch out like this. And then you take it out of the other pad. With pads now loose, nothing holding them in, no pins, no little wires, you should be able to just pull them right out. There's the old pads. Comes right out. A little trick. If your pad does not want to come out, this is a rotor, this is the pad. Just push it out a little bit. Front and at the bottom. If you do it very gently, you'll see the piston compressing in. Now remember, if you're doing this with the car running, you're not going to succeed. But if the car is off, pushing the pins in a little bit will be just fine. It will not put too much pressure on the braking system. Some people will typically say open a brake reservoir, and so that way it doesn't break the any lines in the brake system. I didn't do that because I'm only going to push them in. I'm going to push the pistons in just a little bit, just enough to take the old pads out. I'm going to show you that again. Push them out. Push them out. Well, looks like there's some sort of a shimming mechanism in there. And pull the pad right out. So now you have exposure to the 4 hydraulic pistons that squeeze the pads up against the rotor. The pads are out. This is the hardware. You can get a new kit with the new pins and the new wiring to secure it in place, or you can just reuse the old ones. In my case, I will be using a new pin that came with my brakes. Now it came with some safety cutter pins. I'm not going to reuse those. I'm going to use this bracket that holds these pins in place. See those little holes? That's where they go. How did I know it was time to change the brakes? This is a new one. It's about 3/8 of an inch thick. This is the old one. It's about 1/8 of an inch thick. See the difference? The new one is thicker. The old one is skinnier. It means this one has been worn out. I have about 80,000 miles and change on this pad. I don't know how long this one is going to last, because this is the first time I'm using this. So it's supposed to be better than what Toyota would sell. With the pads out, I now have to compress the pistons, the hydraulic pistons. That would push the pads up against the rotor. This is the rotor. There's this little piston right here. Well, they're not little, but they're pistons. There's 2 on this side, and then there's 2 on this side. Compress them. I use a 2-inch and a 3-inch C clamps. Don't use a screwdriver, because sometimes people will stick a screwdriver there at an end, at an angle, and try to push them in. And what that does is it scratches up the rotor. Ideally, this rotor should pretty much last the lifetime of a car, at least 200,000 miles. So as you're compressing the pistons, you want to do so very, very gently. I'll probably go about half a turn on each C-clamp at a time. And you only want to compress them enough to put the new pad in. You don't want to push them all the way in. Now, a little tip, I guess, about cleaning this thing. There's a little rust in there. If you get in there with a little bit of sandpaper, rub off the rust. Put some good brake lubricant on there. If you're going to spray brake cleaner, that stuff that comes in a can, keep it off this rubber seals. The reason being is because if you soak this rubber seals in, they begin to dry out over time. Of course, once the rubber seal dries out, that could potentially cause damage to your brake system. So try to keep those rubber seals in place. The little bit of brake dust that's on them right now is really not that big of a deal, because as soon as you start driving, you're going to get all sorts of dirt all over them anyway. Keep the brake cleaner fluid off the rubber seals. Squeeze the pistons in just enough so you can put in a new pad. Of course, if you're taking out an old one that's about 1/4 of an inch worn out, you'll have to squeeze the cylinders out. Back in the day, you would have to squeeze the cylinder all the way down so that way it comes out evenly and wears your pads out evenly. In this car, you don't have to, because you have actually 2 pistons for each pad. So like I said, squeeze them, compress them just enough to put your new pad in. Cleaning it a little bit probably wouldn't hurt, with a little light sandpaper and putting some brake lubricant, like that. Kind of looks like axle grease. I guess that would be the better term, is brake grease. Just kind of put a little bit on the surfaces of the pistons where they touch the new pads, the new brake pads. The cylinders have been compressed. I used 2 and 3 inch C-clamps. It's very easy to do. I compressed them about 1/4 of an inch, just enough for the new pad to slide right in. Don't force it, don't tap it in with a screwdriver or anything like that. Just wiggle it in there. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, put some brake grease on the parts of the pistons that would touch the pad, because the squeaks come when metal against metal rattles a little bit. It's a very fast rattle, and that's where the squeaks come from. So easy peasy. Don't over compress the piston. Don't over compress the pistons. Compress them just enough to put the new pad in. This is the pins that hold the pads in place. I used 320 grit sandpaper to just kind of knock off some of this loose rust. Then what I will do is I will apply a little bit of that brake lubricating grease, and I will put them back into the car. I don't want to go buy new ones, because this ones will work just fine. Don't scrub it too hard. Don't try to get it nice and shiny, because there's actually a coating on top of this pin that is supposed to prevent it from getting rusty, or too rusty, to the point where it breaks. So don't scrub it too hard, just enough to knock off some of the loose stuff, so you can put some fresh grease on there and put it in the brake assembly to hold the pins in place. I just clean and put a little lubricant on the pin. Now the pin holds the pads in place. Slide it in very gently. If you have to tap it in with a hammer, I'll highly discourage it. Try to figure out why exactly it's not going in. Yeah, but there's some other issues. There's a little hole on there. Make sure the hole is on the inside. It's important because there will be a wire pin that will be holding it in place. So outside, inside, through the 2 holes on your brake pads. If you don't have those holes on your brake pads, the odds are you might have got a wrong one. Or sometimes, well, when I was putting these pads in, I noticed that you can push them in too hard, and then this pin would be sitting on top of it. So don't do that. Make sure that the pin goes through the car bracket and it goes through the pads. Now this is the top pin, so I just put it in to hold the pads in place and more for demonstrative purposes. The bottom pin will be a little bit trickier, but not too much. Now that the top pin is in, we'll start getting ready for the bottom pin. The only thing you really need to do is insert this little spring. Very easy. There's a hole right here. There's a matching hole on this side. You want to squeeze the spring in a little bit, and there it goes. It's pretty important not to get the spring in the wrong way. Hopefully this video will help you to make sure you don't get it in the wrong way. There's that little hole right there, and then there's a matching hole on this side, and this metal wire pin, it goes in such a way that when I put the bottom pin in place, it will sit underneath. This pin will sit underneath the bottom pin. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put the bottom pin in. And I'm going to slide it in. Well, of course, I just moved the camera away. So I slide it in all the way through. Bam. Again, if you have to hammer this in, there's something wrong, make sure you don't have to hammer these pins in, okay? You may have to tap it a little bit to get them out in case if there's some corrosion there, but you do not want to be punching them in with a hammer. If they're lubricated and these little holes are not too rusty, you should be able to just slide them right in with your fingers, with your hand, and they go in very gently. Now make a note of this little holes that I was telling you about earlier on the ends of the pin. We'll need that in order to secure the ends of this pin in place. Okay, so brand new pads in. The pins that are holding pad in place are in. I put a little lubricant in both. This bottom wire is in. Now we're going to secure the pins. There's a couple of different, there's a cotter pin you can use, but I'm actually going to reuse the part that came with the original brakes. I cleaned it and it looked good. I was telling you about those little holes right there. Pay attention to them, make it a little bit easier to put this wire in. And the wire is in. And you just clip it in, just like so. Now, we're done. All that's left is to put the tire back on. That's it. I just turned the car on, squeezed the brake pedal a couple of times, and I'm over here checking the brake fluid reservoir that sits right on top of the master cylinder. There's 2 lines. There's that one. That's the max. There's that one. That's the min. Max obviously stands for maximum. Min stands for minimum. You don't want to have less brake fluid than this line here. You do not want to have more brake fluid than this very hard to see line here. Now a couple of little tips here. First off, whenever you are raising a car, especially the front wheels, always set the parking brake. Second tip, when you are working on these brakes, you want to turn them. So you want to turn your wheels to the left, so that way you are actually facing the brake, so that way it's easier to work on. Another thing is, when it comes to lug nuts, a lot of people don't know this. You break the lug nuts loose while the tire is on the ground, then you raise the car, and then you undo the lug nuts. One more tip, and this is a extra. A rotor can sometimes rust to the axle or whatever's behind this thing. In order to take it off, you see how there's that little tiny slot right there for a bolt, and then there's a second one right there. You just find a bolt that fits that. Make sure don't cross thread it, and then you put the bolt in, and as you tighten the bolt and it goes in, it will actually loosen, break the rotor off the car. Of course, on this car, in order to change the rotor, you have to take apart this whole assembly, and that's way beyond the scope of what I want to do today. Well, I hope you found this video helpful. If you didn't, you can say so in the comments or give me a thumbs down. If you did, you can give me a thumbs up and leave something in the comments. The odds are I will not check the comments because I don't care. Bye.